If you have a few minutes to listen, I have an amazing story to share with you. Now, you probably don't know OBON Society, but we return the remains of missing servicemen back to their brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. And we've been doing this for more than 13 years. However, out of all the many remains that we have handled over the years, right now we are engaged in the most extraordinary, the most unexpected and surprising situation we have ever encountered. And I want to tell you about this. Down in Corpus Christi, Texas, is a World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Lexington. Now, this ship fought for 21 months in the South Pacific. It was attacked by submarines with torpedoes. It was attacked by kamikazes and survived it all. And today, it is a spectacular floating maritime museum where people can go wander through and see how the sailors lived back in World War II. They can see the historic aircraft they have on board and many, many displays and exhibits. In one exhibit, they show what is called a meatball flag. And here is a Japanese flag with, they say, 92 signatures of kamikaze pilots. Now keep that all in mind because that's the background to the story. Back in early April of this year, we were contacted by a gentleman in Japan who told us the following story. He said that his grandfather had been drafted, sent to war, was killed, and lost in action. Just no remains ever came home. Then he told us how his grandmother had recently died, and they were preparing for her funeral when they got word that the grandfather's remains had been discovered and they're in America. So he was writing to OBON Society asking us to please obtain possession of his grandfather's remains and return them to the family in Japan. Well, as you might have put together already in your mind, of all things, the remains that this man was talking about happens to be the kamikaze flag aboard the Lexington. So I asked the gentleman, well, how do you know these are your grandfather's remains? He replied, I have photographic proof. I have a picture of my family. And he showed us a picture of his grandfather and grandmother, and his grandfather is holding this flag. And he told us if you look at the detail written on the flag, and then you look at the flag in the Lexington, it matches. It matches perfectly, like a fingerprint or just like DNA. It matches because it is the same flag. Well, then we asked him, well, now that's very convincing. Is there any more information you can share with us? And he says, that little boy with the round hat, that's my father, and he's 82 years old and in very good shape. And I showed him a picture of this flag and asked him, Dad, what do you see when you look at this? And he said, well, there's my father's name and there's my grandpa's name there. And these are all relatives of ours. And these are all neighbors. They live here and they know their neighbors because that family has lived in the same valley for the past 400 years. And in addition to this, he said, now, these three kids in this photograph, that's my dad and my aunt and my uncle. And they're all still alive. In fact, they're in very good health. So, upon seeing this information and this proof, we had to reach out to the Lexington and explain it to them. Now, I was nervous about this, like what are they going to say and what do I say? But I put the information together. I sent it to them and explained the situation, and there was not one moment of hesitation. The staff of the USS Lexington looked at the evidence and they said, absolutely, that belongs to the family. We must return it. I was so stunned at how sympathetic and gracious they were. And this helped me realize that this is like a textbook example of when we hear about truth, justice, and the American way. They saw the evidence. They knew what the truth was. They realized the just thing to do was to return it. And the American way is just this spirit of when we go to war and we have to fight a war, we fight a war, but we don't punish the children. We don't punish the wives. We don't punish the family. That's the American way. Well, out of this emerged another story. And I wanted to share that with you because you see that husband and wife, the grandma and grandfather, were not alone in this situation. Many other men went to war and didn't come home. In fact, in this village or in this valley, they assembled everybody together and did like a group photograph. There's the grandmother down there in the bottom left-hand corner and her husband up in the back row. But all the other young men in this valley were drafted into the war also, leaving behind all of their wives. And those men did not come home. And so this group of widows, after the occupation ended, pooled together their money and they rented a bus. And they went on a long bus ride of 12 or 14 hours all the way to Tokyo. And they arrived at a shrine, and they had brooms and towels, and they swept and dusted that day and talked with the spirits of their missing husbands. And then they took the long bus ride home. And so those ladies made this trip year after year after year. Here are those same ladies in 1962, 17 years after the war, and they continue to go to this shrine. Here they are at the entranceway. And as you can see, they are no longer young women. What you can't see is that they are starting to worry about the question of would their husbands recognize them if they were to die and go to heaven? Would the husbands know who they were? Because they all knew that when their husbands were alive, they were young women in the prime of their youth. Their skin was very smooth and pretty, but those days were gone. Here are those same women in 1972, 27 years after the war ended, at the entrance to this shrine, preparing for their day of cleaning and dusting and sweeping and conversations with their missing husbands. But the thoughts continue. The day when it comes that I die and go to heaven, will my husband be able to identify me? This woman, the grandmother, recently passed away at the age of 102. The family was preparing for her funeral when we announced to them that the USS Lexington was willing to return the remains of their grandfather, of her husband. At that moment, the family suspended all the plans for the funeral, put everything on pause. And right now, they are waiting for the remains of the grandfather to return to Japan, at which point they will put the remains alongside the urn containing the grandmother's ashes. And the husband and wife spirits can then have a conversation and become reacquainted. Later, when the family has the funeral and the grandmother's spirit goes to heaven, they will be assured that grandfather will recognize the grandmother and they will spend eternity together in heaven. Our plans are this. We are going to be in Corpus Christi, Texas. The administration and staff of the USS Lexington will remove this flag from their collection and pass it into our possession. We will carry the flag with us to Tokyo, and there we will meet the family where the grandmother had gone every year to have a conversation with her husband. And at that point, we will return the remains of this family back to them. At that point, the mission of OBON Society will be over. We will have brought peace back to this family, and we will have brought peace between our nations.